So please put your hands together for Lee Reeves.
Thank you, Liz, and welcome, and I'm not going to make you say it back real loud, but welcome to AZ Wordsmith's, I almost said Prose Open Mic, AZ Wordsmith's Stories That Matter. I'm Lee Reeves, as she said, but I'd like to also introduce you to some of the other people that have made this happen. We have Janet Hopkins, AZ Wordsmith was her dream, and she made it happen. Sue Favia, a founding member. Stephen Kartstein, who is currently retired from the Elks here as marketing and program manager. And so he's agreed to help us with AZ Wordsmith. And there's also two other people that have actually made a big difference in making this happen. One of them is Liz Rogers, who you just heard from, program and marketing manager. And then Matt Santos, and you're going to be hearing from Matt later. He's one of our storytellers. What a nice group of people, my goodness. Our mission, AZ Wordsmith's mission, is to bring people from the Tri-City community together to promote creative expression and foster human connection through the art and craft of writing and storytelling. Everybody's told you about the Wildcard when you walked in, and I know some of you don't want to do it, but you could change your mind between now and the intermission. We're only going to be able to draw for two, but if you do change your mind, you can do it right up to the first couple minutes of the intermission. We will have a brief intermission and then get back to the stories. So very grateful for the 6 brave souls that have decided to come here and put themselves out and tell their story. So I don't think I even have to tell this audience that we need your appreciation. Let them know how much you appreciate them and value what they've done. And a second reminder about the phones, it would be great if we could, at least till intermission, refrain from them. With that, I'm going to introduce our first guest storyteller. Sue Halvorsen earned a bachelor's degree. Yay, Sue. So earned a bachelor's degree in wilderness education and traveled to many wild places. Yet the most amazing place she has ever visited is the edge of eternity. Sue.
Can I have this in the stand? In here? Okay. I'm not good at this part. Okay, everybody hear me okay? All right. Okay. Well, I was once asked what the greatest gift ever given to me was. Without a doubt, a near-death experience. When I was in my early 20s, I started to not feel well. I went to the doctor, and they told me, nothing's wrong, you're just stressed. You need to go to the movies more. Okay. But I kept feeling worse and worse. No doctor could figure out what was wrong with me. They kept telling me, you're fine. They thought it was all in my head. But I felt like I was dying. I could tell I was slowly dying. But I just stuffed it in because they said it was in my head. Well, then one day, a doctor came in at our Domino's Pizza store where my husband and I franchised, and she could tell I wasn't feeling well. And she asked me a few questions. Then she said, you know what? Come on into my office. I'll do an exam on you. Okay, why not? So I went. She goes, you're too young to be feeling like this. She goes, what are you doing Sunday at 10 o'clock? As if she was inviting me to church. I said, nothing. She goes, great. Come on to the hospital. I'm going to do exploratory surgery on you. I'm like, whoo, okay. Exploratory surgery is when they make a slit right next to your belly button and they blow your abdomen up like a balloon. Then they take a camera and they poke it in there and they look at all your organs and they can take pictures. They call that exploratory surgery. So I arrived Sunday at 10 o'clock and they got me all prepped and the anesthesia put the medicine in me, but instead of going to sleep, I rose up out of my body towards the operating lights, up through the ceiling and into the vast field universe full of stars. I felt perfect. I'd never felt that good in my entire life. Then I noticed there was one star brighter than the others, and I was drawn to it. And the closer I got, the bigger it got. And it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger till it filled my entire vision. Once it got that close, I realized I knew everything. I knew the answer to every question you could possibly ask. Not only did I know everything, I was a part of everything, but yet I was still an individual. Then I heard my name, Sue, Sue, Sue. And I wanted to stay, so I leaped for the center of all that brightness, and a hand grabbed my ankle and stopped me. And they kept repeating my name, Sue, Sue. I'm like, no. And I tried to leap again for the center of all that brightness, but the grip on my ankle got tighter and started pulling me away from the light. I was struggling the best I could to stay, but the grip was too strong. Then these wispy clouds started to form around me, like in a circle, as if I was in a tornado. And I tried to grasp the mist to stay, to no avail, and I just kept falling faster and faster through this vortex until, bam, I was slammed back into my body. And the nurse was hovering over me. Sue, Sue, it's time to wake up now. I was so disappointed. So finally, when they were able to keep me awake, the doctor entered my room, followed by 3 or 4 interns in practice, and then my husband. The doctor is on my left, my husband is on my right, and the 3 or 4 interns formed a half circle at the foot of my bed. The doctor looks up at her chart and says, you have stage 3 or 4 cancer, and it has spread throughout your body. Now, in 1988, that's pretty much a death sentence. I remember looking at her and saying, well, am I going to be all right? She just shakes her head, I don't know, and looks down at her chart. So I look around for anybody for signs of hope. Nobody was looking at me. Everybody was staring at the floor. I look at my husband, and he's got his head in his hands crying. So I stare at the ceiling for a moment, and all of a sudden, I heard the sounds of a photocopier scanning an image. And I looked up, and I saw this beam of light at the top of my head. It started moving down my body, just like it was scanning me. And then when it exited my feet, I knew that I was healed. I was going to be all right. So I turned to the doctor and I screamed, I'm healed! I scared the crap out of her. Of course, she's believing I'm in denial, so she pats me on the shoulder. Don't worry, honey. I've got you scheduled for major surgery in 2 days with one of the best oncologists at an oncology hospital. What we're going to do, she explained to me, is they're going to cut you up and down vertically, and they're going to try to remove as many organs as they can and still save your life. That was her plan, okay? But I didn't care because I was convinced. You could not have said anything to me that would have convinced me that I was not okay and healed. Plus, I wanted to go back to where I was at, and this time I was planning on not coming back. I told nobody what happened during that surgery. So they get me prepped for the major surgery. I'm excited. All right, I'm excited because I don't care what they think. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. So they put me under, and the surgery was 7 hours. But for me, it was like 1 second. There was none of the stuff I had in the first one. But the surgeon, the doctor, was right there by my bed, shaking me, going, Sue, you're going to be okay. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. This is doctor screaming that, right? I'm like, I know. Basically, when he got in there to do the major surgery, all of the tumors they saw in the first surgery, which during that first surgery, she brought in a second doctor because she wanted a second opinion while I was under. So he saw it, she saw it, my husband saw the pictures, the oncologist saw all the pictures of all the tumors were gone. The only tumors left was one on my uterus and one on my ovary. So they took those out, they sent them to the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, some fancy oncology labs on the East Coast, and a few other ones in the local area. He said they all came back. They had no idea what those tumors were, but they were missing the aggressive cancer cell. So he said, my diagnosis, you're going to live to be 102, no further treatment. Now, normally a surgery, they still had to cut me up and down because they didn't know what they were going to find. They thought, in the pictures, they were going to have to do major surgery. So normally a surgery like that takes 7 days in the hospital before you can go home, and then another 3 months to recover when you're at home. I was out of the hospital in 3 days. I remember being wheeled outside, and I remember looking at all the colors. They were so much more vibrant. And I remember the smells were so much richer. And I remember the ride home. I was looking at the cornfields and the wheat fields, seeing them with different eyes. They were so alive. It's like they were dancing in a pattern, swaying back and forth. I remember telling my husband, oh my God, look, do you see that? He's like, look at what? He didn't know what I was seeing. It was like I was seeing half in the spiritual realm and half in the physical realm. When we got home, because I still had to recover, I remember being in this blissful state. But every time, all of a sudden, something changed. Every time I went to sleep, it didn't matter if it was for a nap or for the evening, I'd go to hell. It was like a nightmare. I'd be lowered on my back down a vortex. I'd hear a buzzing sound like, it was as I would be lowering to this dungeon or pit underground. I remember I was trying to wake up or trying to get out, and I couldn't. I'd be lowered onto this cement slab that was as cold as ice. And I remember seeing these horrible, I don't even know what to call them, beings walk by me. And I remember hearing cries of people being tortured and chains clinging, and people screaming. And I was trying to scream myself, and it was just horrible. And I remember feeling, you don't just feel pain, you are pain. You don't just feel lonely, you are loneliness. It's quite different than experiencing it when you are it. And it was just terrifying. And just when I thought I couldn't take another minute, I'd hear that sound again, and I'd start to be raised back up. And I was trying to wake up. You ever had a nightmare, you just can't wake up? You try to wake up, you just can't? Well, that was me. And I was being raised up, and then when I popped out top of the vortex, I'd wake up, and I'd be like gasping for air, sweat covering my body, and I'd beg my husband, don't let me fall asleep, don't let me fall asleep, I don't want to go back there anymore. That lasted for an entire week. And I remember the last time it happened, I was coming back up, same thing would happen every single time, the nightmare, everything would happen the same. I remember being raised back up. This time, when I popped out of the top, there was this big flash of light, like a lightning bolt, and a big, like, smack like that. And something clicked, something changed at that moment. And I had this burning desire to know what happens to you when you die. And I was just this little farm girl. I didn't know anything about New Age, nothing about spirituality. I was not a religious person. Because this is before Google, this is before the internet. I didn't even know what a near-death experience was. So I just had this burning desire, and I told my husband everything that had happened to me in there. And so we began this search of what happens to you when you die. And the greatest gift that was given to me is I discovered the answer to what happens to you when you die, because I knew that both of them were a part of it. They both seemed a part of what happened. I didn't want to go to hell. I wanted this thing. And that drove me to find out the answer to what happens to you when you die. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Cloud Oaks Our next storyteller enjoys camping, hiking with friends, her dogs Kanga and Roo in the Southwest Desert Lands. In 2014, she earned a master's at Prescott College in art education, but she waited 7 years to move to Prescott. Now she's wondering why. Cloud is a full-time oil painter, and in 2023, she combined her love of art with her love of community and founded the Art Hive, a collective of 27 art studios with a contemporary arts gallery right here in Prescott. Let's
Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my full name is Infinite Cloud Oaks. And I was born in Sedona, Arizona, back in the early 70s. So yeah, you can guess the kind of parents I got to grow up with. And the many fun adventures we got to have. We left Arizona, though, when I was still little and moved to Austin, Texas. But my parents really missed the desert. So every August, they'd pile me and my brothers, Jerome and Catlin, into whatever car we had going on that year and make a trip back across the desert to visit my uncle in California. And we'd camp along the way. This story is about one of those camping trips when my dad saved our lives, but it also changed my brother's perception of cars for the rest of his life. The car of choice that year was a trusty, but slightly rusty, brown on brown Land Cruiser. Now, today it would be a collector's item, but back then I was only 8 or 9 and really didn't care what kind of vehicle we drove, except the Land Cruiser did have an advantage. And that was, I was the oldest, and so occasionally, on road trips especially, I got the privilege to leave the squeeze of the back seat and climb up on top of all the camping gear and the luggage and sit there stretched out by myself and read my Archie comic books for hours. Or just daydream, watching the landscape slip by, counting telephone poles to 100 and then again. So yeah, the trip over to California went just fine. My dad chain smoking across state lines, with his window cracked that required 2 inches. My mom doling out dried apricots and nuts to me and my brother Jerome, teething biscuits for my baby brother, those brown ones that smear everything with that brown stuff that never really comes out. Yeah, the camping trip in California was just really great, but our luck turned on our way back to Texas. Our Land Cruiser, now loaded down with sandy camping gear and really stinky clothes, decided to start spewing billows of black smoke when we're going down the California highway. Yeah, so my dad carefully rolls us to the side of the highway, and we sit quietly while he pops the hood, gets out, stares at the smoking engine, his smoke, the engine smoke intertwined all around him, his red hair billowing out like a halo, cars whizzing by. It didn't look very good. And so the tow ride back to the tow yard was silent and memorable. Us and all of our camping BO piled into the cab of that tow truck and made our way to the neighboring town with all of our belongings, my baby brother's car seat, my Archie comics, my dad's constant road atlas, all bobbing in the Land Cruiser behind us. And when we got to the tow yard, it didn't look very good. Not at all. So my dad begrudgingly traded in his beloved Land Cruiser for a smaller, but running, pea green VW Rabbit. Yeah, it's sat conveniently for sale nearby. So this was the hatchback version, much too small for a family of 5 and all their camping gear. So we were very squeezed for the rest of the trip back to Texas. Me, squeezed in between my 2 brothers, no escape, and no camping gear. My dad gave it all to the guy who sold us the VW Rabbit. declaring, "Our loss is your gain." Now, even at 9, I knew that that was not a straight deal. But I also knew not to speak up, so I stayed quiet. I did notice my mom pilfer a blanket and the food cooler before we left, and I thought that was pretty good planning on her part. So, with all of our belongings and all 3 of us kids squeezed into that tiny back seat, my dad just blasted across the rest of California. And then Nevada was a somber ride of readjustment, smoke curls out of the window, and miles of flat road. We were all hot and tired, and I'm sure way sick of me sitting between my 2 brothers. And we were somewhere around northern Arizona when all of a sudden my dad decided to turn off the highway onto a single-track dirt road that winded its way through the Red Rock canyons and mesas, declaring, "Let's make camp early today. We've had enough excitement." Now, this is not my dad. My dad drives late into the night, and he often stops and we make camp late when it's pitch black, and then wake up early the next morning and get out on the road quick before the traffic picks up, beating the truckers at the game, he called it. Yeah, but we welcomed this change of mood in my dad, and we hollered and laughed while he took us on a roller coaster ride up one mesa and down another. We cranked down the windows and had a billowing cloud of dust behind it. My dad floored that VW up one gully, down another. It was great fun. But when he decided that that was enough of that game, he parked us up on top of a mesa and declared that the campsite for the night. I'm sure it was just a regular old dried creek bed down below, but to me, it looked like a magic fairyland of red rocks and twisted trees, and I just thought it would be the perfect campsite that night. So we tumbled out of the car, and Mom set to making dinner. Jerome and I went off down into the riverbed to scout for the perfect place to camp. And me being the oldest again, took charge. And I felt that it would be a great idea to build a fort to sleep in that night. So, knowing we had no tent, no sleeping bags, Jerome and I set to work with twisted branches and river rock. We built a great fort, and then we found clumps of old dried tree leaves up on the cliff edge and gathered those for blankets and bedding. We built the best fort. It was so much fun. And that night, as I lay in my leafy bed, my mom and dad sleeping nearby with my baby brother under the one blanket, Jerome and I snuggled in our leaves. I looked up between the branches of our fort at the mass of twinkling stars outside, and I thought, yeah, this is the best camping trip ever. I woke in the middle of the night to my dad yelling, wake up now and run for the rabbit now." What, were we under attack from coyotes? Was it a bear? I didn't know, but I could hear the fear in my dad's voice. And I sat up straight and I listened, and then I heard it. It was a roar coming, and it was getting louder. I didn't know what that roar was, but it sounded really angry and really unforgiving. And I knew I did not want to come face to face with that roar in that darkness. So I hightailed it up that mesa to that VW Rabbit. We all got there just in time to pile in the car right as the sky let loose and the rain started pelting down on us. We turned around and we could see a wall of black water racing into the canyon, totally wiping out where we had just been camping. No sign would ever be there that we had been there. We sat in that Rabbit, rain streaming down the windows, huddled underneath that one blanket for hours. I remember looking and watching my brother's reflection in the window next to me, his forehead pressed up against the window, rain streaming down, making those steam clouds and then wiping it off when it became all clammy, just to see outside, to watch the river rising all around us. We were stranded on an island in the middle of God knows what dark, raging sea. Now, I was nervous and also wondering, what was my dad going to do here? He was amazing, but this? So eventually, my brother falls asleep, and I look up at my dad sitting behind the wheel. I said, hey, Dad, why don't we just drive out of here? Nothing. Crickets. Full inhale and exhale out of that open window, adding to the wetness of it all. And then he says, she may not float. We'll just have to wait till the morning light and find out. Just you sit tight. Well, future therapy will say that that is not the thing to tell an anxious 9-year-old with a lot of time on her hands. But my dad wasn't about to sugarcoat things, and I did appreciate that about him. So I sat and I waited, and I weighed our options. By the time the morning came, I had figured it out. We were going to float like Herbie did in The Love Bug. I was completely convinced, and I was ready to give it a try. But we didn't get going until my mom finally said, I think it's time to give it, whatever it's going to be, a try. My dad turned on the ignition, he rolled up his window, and he sealed us in. So we roll up to that first river crossing, and that brown water is just churning. Water is everywhere. Just getting through the mud to that river crossing was something else. But he rolls up and he eyeballs it like he knows what he's doing. Jerome and I are sitting in the back seat, braced for magic, Herbie magic. And then he starts gunning that engine. He guns that engine and he gets ready, and we're braced in that seat, and I grab my brother's hand tight. And he grabs mine tighter, scrunches up his face because he doesn't want to see what's going to happen. But I want to see. With all my 9-year-old soul, I want to see if we're going to float or what. We hit that bank of water like we were still in that Land Cruiser. Splash of an excitement. But too quickly, way too quickly, it turned into a low-throttled churn. As we lost ground and the water started to rise, branches and debris were hitting our windows, and we were holding our breath. She floats, I cried. My brother echoes, she floats. I'm sure my dad was mumbling a lot underneath his breath, but I didn't care, because to me, we were in the Love Bug, and I was okay. Dad, I cried, Dad, you got this. And I reached up to grab his shoulder, and I noticed he was gripping that steering wheel really tight. And I'm sure he didn't hear my helpful reassurances, because he was waiting. He was waiting to feel the ground back underneath our tires. And there it was. He got it. He declares, she does float. And she floats, we all chanted. And Herbie just tore up the side of that cliff and left a trail of water going up the mountain all the way to the next river crossing. Here we go, my dad yelled every time, and we made river crossing after river crossing all the way back out to the main road, floating every time, with my brother even shouting, she floats, with his eyes wide open. Years later, after telling this story many times around the Thanksgiving table, my dad asked my brother, what kind of car are you going to get with your hard-earned savings? Without hesitation, he answered, a VW Rabbit, of course. And he did. He really did. And he even became a VW mechanic to put himself through grad school. And I heard him many times declare, there's no better car than a VW Rabbit that floats.
Wow, thank you, Cloud. This is great. JohnMorris has spent his career in the people business in the various capacities as chaplain, pastoral counselor, and addictions counselor. In his retirement from a 25-year career with Yavapai County, he's spending his days traveling and hiking, cooking, and public speaking. John is proudest of his marriage to Greta Stromberg and being the father of 2 brilliant daughters and 4 wonderful grandchildren. He attributes his good fortune to being a person in long-term recovery. John.
Thank you, Lee. Stories that matter. A person that matters. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, Charles E. Ida Lee Morris. She was born in Carroll County, Georgia. She was a Southern woman through and through. In fact, when I was thinking about this story, I wanted to share with y'all, all y'all. That's plural for y'all. And I thought of her, and I thought of the term steel magnolia, which I looked up the definition, and it's something like an exemplary, an example of femininity and uncommon valor. And I would say that describes my grandmother, although not much on the feminine side, because she really was not, much interested in that part. And you'll know why as I share the story with you. But she really had courage and strength and great love for her family and for her number 1 grandson, which was me. And the reason she matters to me is that she is really, even though she's been dead for 32 years, she made a major impact on me as a child and as a young adult later in life. She grew up on a farm in Carroll County, Georgia, in a little village called Temple, Georgia. You can look it up. It's a little crossroads over in West Georgia. She knew the value of hard work. In fact, often would quote that she would earn her living by the sweat of her brow. Later, she married a local boy, my paternal grandfather, who didn't really share her enthusiasm for hard work. In fact, he was more interested in moonshine and running moonshine. And he was, turns out, a very violent alcoholic. And as a result, in 1935, my grandmother divorced my grandfather and raised my father and my aunt all on her own, by her own tenacity and her own creativity, which really proved her commitment to her family and the love that she showed. If you think back in 1935, to be a divorced single mother, it was not a popular thing for a woman particularly. But through her tenacity and what she learned living through the Depression and learned on the farm was hard work. And this lady could make anything out of anything. She was industrious. She was a seamstress. That's how she earned her living. And she would do laundry. She would make dresses and shirts. In fact, when I went into first grade, the first shirt I wore was a dress. Not a dress, well, that's another story. But anyway, she made a shirt for me, which I proudly wore on my first day in first grade. But she could tat, lace. She could crochet. She could knit. And this woman was a true Southern cook because she could make comfort food. You know what I'm talking about. Fried chicken, biscuits and gravy, macaroni and cheese. And I haven't even told you about made from scratch banana pudding. That's how we say it back from our banana pudding. I still think about that. And anytime she came to visit us in my family, it was always excitement. Now, something else about my grandmother. She never had a driver's license. She never flew in an airplane. She was born on April the 1st of 1899. April the 1st, remember that. Because it really fit with my grandmother. And she was no fool. But she had a great sense of humor. And she was young at heart. In fact, when she would come visit, I was in 4th grade. My sister was 3 years younger than me, and I was rehearsing for a play, and I had to do this Indian dance, you know, so I was showing my sister, and she was helping me. We were whooping and hollering and dancing around and making sure we got our steps right, and my grandmother was watching TV, sitting over there quietly in the corner in an easy chair. Now, I don't know why, but my grandmother loved to scare the bejesus out of us, and we would forget this thing. So we're, you know, practicing our dance moves. My sister's helping me. And then all of a sudden, she just lets out a screech out of nowhere. Ah! And, of course, after that, you know, we made it a big game. And so we kept dancing so she would scare us some more. But anyway, she was young at heart. Now, I grew up in what we, modern parlance, is a dysfunctional family. My father, because of the legacy of his violent alcoholic father, lived with or lived by rage and anger. And my mother was addicted to the prescription drug Darvon and was chronically depressed. Now, I didn't know any of these things when I was younger. This is all because of a lot of therapy and a lot of work that I've done, and I've uncovered some things. So my grandmother would come when my mother was sick and come and take care of us. And we could always count on her consistency. And so that uncommon valor that she would show and that tenacity and love for her family, she would always show up at the right time. And as a little kid, I just thought, well, this is what grandmothers do, because that's what she did. And again, I got to experience the gift that she gave me, which served me later in life, of the felt sense of unconditional love. Now, let me tell you, I probably don't need to tell you what a gift that is, because I've worked in the field with people who never experienced that. And the research shows that if there's one adult who's looking out for your well-being, if they're in your life and you know it, the trajectory for positive things in your life increases exponentially. I was fortunate for that. Now, later in life, I got married. You heard a little bit about my resume. I was a Baptist preacher. I never would have thought that, looking back from how I grew up. But after my mother died, my life took a trajectory, and I got involved in the church, and it got me out of South Florida, where I was a hooligan, basically. A bunch of my buddies, and, you know, in the 70s, late 60s, cocaine was very popular coming in from Cuba and South America. Fortunately, I didn't get involved in that, but I did enough things, believe me. Things I got caught for, but things I should have gotten caught for. Thank God I didn't, I guess. But as a result, I got married. I didn't really know how to do this family thing. It was kind of a strange enterprise for me. I'd see it on TV. I saw it in movies. I saw it in maybe other families. So I did the best I could. But at about 10 years, it all fell apart. Primarily because of my own alcoholism and my inability to bond significantly with another. And there I am in Nashville, Tennessee, serving as chaplain and pastoral counselor at 800-bed hospital in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And it doesn't lead to longevity in one's career when at the buckle of the Bible Belt when you're drinking and carousing. It doesn't bode well. But fortunately, it was the springboard for change for me, because any significant change that I've ever experienced, and maybe you have too, comes from some modicum of pain. Something, you know, my behavior could be really objectionable to you, But until it's objectionable to me, there's no chance for change. Back to my grandmother. So I'm here in Prescott. I'm one of those. I stayed. I went to treatment here, and 3 months into my 5-month stint at Prescott House, which is an extended care treatment facility for men, which I learned a heck of a lot about how to be a man in the world. Before that, I was playing sports. I could do all these things, but I didn't know how to be intimate. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I didn't even think that was possible, because to be vulnerable, the way I grew up, meant pain. You were going to get hurt. At any rate, a third month into my treatment, I get a call from my sister saying Grammy's in the hospital. She was in Florida, where she was living, Panama City, Florida, with my aunt. And so I call the number my sister gave me at the hospital, and she answered the phone. How does that happen? This was in May of '91. She picks up the phone. Grammy, how are you? I'm so worried about you. And she said, Johnny, I'm doing okay. I'm in the hospital. Don't worry. Again, showing that love and care. More concerned about me than she was for herself. And as I found out she was doing well, she ends the conversation with this. She said, and she never really talked to me about this. I'd ask her a few questions like, Grammy, what was your motto? And she said, my motto is, be kind to the neighbors and live and let live. She lived by that. So at any rate, she said, Johnny, I had a dream last night. 2 men in suits walked in with you into my room and said, Johnny is going to be all right. The next day she died. But I must tell you, I grieved longer and harder for my mother's death than I did for my grandmother. There's something about the quality of that relationship. You would think I'd want more of that and really fight to keep it. But the truth was, when there's positivity like that, that she exemplified, made the grieving so much easier. And grief is never easy. Let's just say it made it better. I saw a bumper sticker. You may have seen it around here. It says, God, help me be the man my dog thinks I am. And I must tell you, because of my grandmother, I'm the man, because of the memories that I have, and because of her unconditional love for me, I'm the man I want to be. So I'm going to do a bumper sticker. Because you heard, I have some grandkids now. They're wonderful. I show you pictures later at the break. Tell you about my grandson. He plays baseball. Jackson Roper, remember that name? Anyway, I digress. My bumper sticker will be, God, help me be the grandparent my grandmother was to me.
Thank you, John. Wow, wonderful. And now we have one more story before the break. Michael David Ker is an award-winning writer, director, playwright, solo storytelling artist, teacher. Okay, he's incredible. Okay, so all right, I won't. This is what you gave me. Well, I got to get to the important part. So he is a Moth storyteller and winner of a Moth and if you don't know what the Moth is, it's like the granddaddy of storytelling. So you need to go Google that, and you'll hear some good stories. Now, that's all. I'm not going to. I have a long introduction. I'm passing on it. Let's give Michael David Ker a warm welcome.
So in 2018, I was in a wildfire, my house that I was renting that had everything in it. And it was it's the probably one little bungalow in Malibu that wasn't like $1 million. And it was a friend of mine, and they rented this kind of beach bungalow to me. And I kept waiting and waiting and waiting until I figured the fire would go away and it wouldn't pass us. And then when smoke was kind of coming through the door, at that point I opened the door and there was just flames everywhere and the entire neighborhood was on fire. And I started running through the house and I was screaming, "Only what's important! Only what's important!" I just had a box and I was grabbing pictures of my family and my son's drawings, and I was just screaming that over and over, "Only what's important!" And I got in the car and I drove away as the flames were going up and the house, everything got taken. So since I was in Malibu, where there's lots of rich people, they were very generous. They had a giveaway for clothes for people who'd lost all their clothes, which was me and my son. And so I went to this, giveaway kind of giant thing, and there's these fancy suits and shoes and all kinds of stuff. And there was a lot of people kind of coming through. I don't think they even lost their house. They were just like grabbing stuff. And as I was going through the bins of clothes, I came across this sweater. And as an adult, I know this is a Lacoste sweater, but as a kid, I used to call these alligator shirts. And I knew I had to have this sweater. So now, going back 40 years ago, the other thing is the house that burned down was a 10-minute walk from this junior high where I went to. When I was 12 years old, my family and we lived in a place called Valley Cottage, New York, and it was this small town. And I hated it. I called it a hick town even from the time I was like 9 years old, because if I'd throw a snowball at at a car, like my mom would get a call like an hour later from the crossing guard. And I was just like, I hate this town, or there was 2 pinball machines and like all the big kids would use them and I wouldn't even be able to use the pinball machines. And I was just into like TV shows, like I Dream of Jeannie. I loved movies, like I loved Rocky. That was my favorite movie. And I was into skateboarding and I sucked at all the sports. All the kids could do like lacrosse, which is where they like whip the ball at you like 100 miles an hour, like hits you in the arm. It's like being shot with a bullet. And I sucked at that. And so when my dad said we're moving to California, I was like so excited. I was like, oh my God, Farrah Fawcett Majors lives there and I can't wait to go to California. So we ended up moving to Malibu, and this is now back in the late 70s and very different time. There were places in Malibu in the canyons where normal people could live. There was blue-collar normal people, you could afford a house. And then there was parts that were like super rich, like the Malibu Colony, which is where Farrah Fawcett Majors and all the movie stars live. So I go to this junior high, I'm so excited, and I swear there must have been something in the water because all of the kids felt like they were blonde. I mean, my dad would be like, I could easily pick you out when I would come to pick you up somewhere like on the weekend because you were the only kid who wasn't blonde. Like all these kids were blonde. And so I had, the first day of gym, I had like cut off jeans and I'm running in my jeans and like this blonde kid, Miles, who's like the perfect kid with like the perfect blonde hair and could part it the way, and all the girls liked him. And he was like, oh my God, what a kook. Those are what Vals wear, the shorts. And I was like, ugh. And so I really, of course, as a junior high person, it's like, who's the one person I really want to impress? It's the person who can't stand me. And so it's the person who rejects me. That's the person. So Miles, because, and the other thing is like all the girls liked him, all the cute girls who looked like Farrah Fawcett, and I was like, I gotta get to know Miles, you know. And so I started to do things in the school, like, you know, I would do dares, like, I dare you to throw like a grape at that teacher, you know, and the teacher would go by and I'd be the one to do it and I'd get in trouble. But somehow Miles was like, you know, slowly like, oh, okay, maybe I can tell this guy what to do and he'll be a kind of friend. The other thing about Malibu was that people were so advanced with what they wore. It wasn't like in New York, you know, where I grew up in the small town. It's kind of like you wear something really dorky, people make fun of you. This was like styles would change all of the time there. And so I begged my mom, I said, Mom, please, can you get rid of these, you know, New York clothes? This is like what kooks wear. And she's like, I bought you all these clothes. And so then I said, please get me OP, because everybody wore OP shirts and OP things. And so please, 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 begged her. So she gets me all OP stuff. So Miles then somehow, because I've said, my mom, I've convinced her to take him and a couple of friends to the skate park. So he's like, okay, you can come to my house. And so he lives in the Malibu colony. And so, you know, we've never been there, my mom, so he gives, you know, the address, and my mom shows up, and she's really like the sweetest person, really low key. You know, we have an older Volvo, and we pull up, and there's like a guard gate, you know, with the thing, and she's never, and she's like very freaked out of authority figures, and she's kind of nervous, and I'm super nervous, and she's like making me more nervous. As the guard is like this guy, and he's like, yes, who are you here to see? And my mom's like, what? You know, and he's like, you need to have the, you know, permission, and we have to have the thing, and call and my mom's like, okay, let's just go to me. And I'm like, no, I have to see Miles, I have to see him, you know. And so so the guard, at this point, there's cars, there's two lanes, the one we're in and then the one next to us. And the one next to us is with the people that live there, and they're like driving by in these fancy like cars and everything. And the guard's like, ma'am, you're gonna have to pull over. And my mom's a bad driver, and it's like a huge deal. And she's kind of blocking the things, and all the people with the fancy cars are like pissed off and honking. And I'm just like sweating. And so finally, we get, you know, he calls and we're approved, and so we get to drive into the Malibu colony, which is the fanciest part where the rich people do live. So my mom drops me off, and Miles sees my mom's car, and he goes, your mom's car is a piece of shit. And she drives off. His mom has a brand new Cadillac with her name on it. It says Marca. So, you know, we start the day, I'm so excited, and his older brother, they're all blonde, by the way, Miles, his older brother, his younger brother, and so his older brother, Charles, throws me in the pool with all my clothes on, and so I get out, and his mom is furious. Miles's mom, Marcus, she comes out, what the hell? He's gonna drip all over my new couch. And she goes, get him right now, get him in new clothes, dry clothes, you know. And so they throw me a towel, and so I go up there, and I see all of these shirts that are like this, you know. And so I'm like, okay, alligator shirts, no more OP, alligator shirts. They're all lined up in the closet. So I beg my mom, you know, we leave, and the one other thing happens too when we're there, I forgot to tell you, which is the I Dream of Jeannie guy drives by, and I'm like, to Miles, I'm like, oh my God, that's the guy from I Dream of Jeannie. He goes, don't point to movie stars. And I was like, and then I see before I leave the friggin' coach from Rocky. He's there, and I go, that's the guy who goes, hey, Rocky, and then he goes, oh my, don't point to the movie stars. And I was like, so I'm now I know, don't point to the movie stars, and I need an alligator, everything alligator. So I go to my mom, and I say, Mom, please, can you get me all alligator stuff? And she goes, I just got you all this OP stuff. There's no way. And I said, please, please, I'll have no birthday this year. Just please get me alligators, everything. And she's like, no, you know, and I just keep on bothering her about it. So I'm at school a few days later, and Miles is there, and he has a shirt that looks kind of like an alligator, but it's a little bit different. I was like, wait, is that a different kind of alligator? He's like, alligators suck. And I go, what? And he goes, this is a polo shirt. Because that's Lacoste, that was like so long ago. Like, I guess those were old ones in his, closet. And so I'm like, polo, okay, it's a polo thing. I got to get a polo thing. So I've got this in my mind. Now I know for sure. So I get off the bus. My mom, sweet as hell, picks me up. It's a mile up the thing, and she'll come and pick me up. And she goes, I finally got you something. And she hands me this bag. And I look inside, and it's literally 5 alligator shirts, 2 alligator sweaters. And she goes, do not ask me. You're not getting anything more. And she's looking at me, and she's going, are you happy? I go, yes, thank you. And I don't want to hurt her feelings. I don't know about return policies because I'm 13. And so I go home, and I'm like, oh, my God, the alligators suck. I can't make my mom. She's done everything. And I'm sitting there. I'm trying to figure out a solution to this. And I find a solution. So the next morning, my mom comes down, I'm in the bathroom, and somehow she notices on the bed all the alligator shirts. I've cut the alligators off. And that way everybody was it was a win-win. Nobody would see the alligator. And she freaks out. What the hell did you do? What are you? And so she comes and gets my dad, and my dad is like, no bullshit. He used to be a sergeant in Korea. He's like, are you fucking kidding me? Do you know how much this costs? Do you know how much these cost? Like, he was just losing his mind. And I said, I know, but the alligators suck. I just don't want to. And so my mom was really good at a lot of things, but she was a terrible sewer. And she sewed these alligators back on. And they were like sideways, and they were with the wrong color. The string was the wrong color, and it was on the wrong way. And my dad, she sewed them on, and my dad said, "You're going when you're wearing the goddamn alligator shirt." And I don't want to hear another word. And so I had to go to school with this sweater, and I held the book over. And then somehow I had a moment of weakness where I dropped the book, and Miles was next to me in the hall, and he goes, oh my God, he sewed it on. He sewed on an alligator. So going back to 2018, only what's important, I knew I had to have this. That's my alligators of Malibu.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That was so funny. That's so good. Okay. So what?
Okay. We have a name.
Okay.
The name is
It's upside down. Pat Kelly. Okay. Are you Pat? Okay. Come on up. Yes, now. Do you know how long it is? 5. Perfect. 5. Okay.
Hi, I'm Pat Kelly, and the name of my story is The Night I Went Blind. The characters in the story are me and my husband. My husband passed away last year, but there are 2 things that you should know that are relevant to what I'm going to tell you. He was a career Marine pilot, and he was a very, very calm man. And one of the things that characterized him was calmness in states of emergency. I guess you learn that as a Marine pilot in the war. The second thing was that he was a very gentle man and caring man. And when we first got together, I actually gave him Mother's Day cards because he took care of me just as my mother did. So there are 2 things to keep in mind. The story takes place in a small town in Oklahoma, somewhere off a highway. We were driving, he was driving, I was the passenger. We were headed to Kansas to visit the in-laws. And we checked into a motel. It was one of those motels that had the outside walkways, so your door opened out onto the walkway and your windows were to the outside. And we were tired, we went to bed. And somewhere in the middle of the night, I kind of woke up and I realized I had to go to the bathroom. So I opened my eyes to orient myself to the room, and I could see nothing. It was absolutely black. And I couldn't figure out what was happening. And I thought, well, maybe I had some film on my eyes. I wiped my eyes. No, it absolutely black. No vision. I put my hand in front of my face, could not see hands in front of my face. Not a glint of light in the room, not a glint. And I looked toward where the windows were, because normally you would see some light from there. No light whatsoever. So I kind of stayed in bed and tried to figure out what is this? I don't understand. I had heard of people having vision problems and ultimately going blind rather quickly, but I thought that you would have some flashes of light that you might experience, and then you were supposed to go to the doctor. But I had no flashes of light, or although I had been sleeping, so I don't know. And then I thought, well, there's another thing I can do to try to figure this out. I knew where the bathroom was, because that's where I was going to be going. And I thought, well, I'll make my way along the wall, because my bed, the side of the bed that I was on was by the wall. So I thought, I'll just go through the room by feeling the wall, and then turn and go in the bathroom. And I knew that there was a bathroom light switch in there, and that would be the test, because maybe the curtains were blocking the light or something. So I went in and I flipped on the light, black, no vision whatsoever, no light, no glint of light. So I went to the bathroom, made my way back to the bed, and I lay in bed, and I heard my husband breathing nicely next to me. And I thought, well, I could wake him up and ask him to take me to an emergency room. We had no idea. Where was the hospital? I had no idea. We're out somewhere in Oklahoma. And I thought, well, he's sleeping so nicely, and it's too late. It's too late. There is no vision whatsoever. So, again, the idea of keep calm in the emergency, and then you have a plan. And I thought, well, we will go back to Prescott, where we had lived for, at that point, about 25 years. And I knew my house. So I thought I could make my way as a blind person around the house. I could navigate it. And then I thought, well, I'm a smart person. I would learn Braille. And then I thought, we love animals, and I could get a dog. And most of all, I knew my husband would take care of me, no matter what the circumstances. So I fell asleep. I was reassured. I knew my plan. I was comforted. I fell asleep. Well, our routine on road trips was that in the morning, my husband would get out and go get the truck filled with gas, and he'd bring back coffee. So I was sleeping, and I heard him getting ready, and I heard the door close. And I kind of woke up a bit, and I opened my eyes, and I could see everything. There was light. And I thought, this is a miracle. And this is incredible. I went from blind to being able to see every detail in the room. And I thought, what a wonderful thing to tell Bill when he comes back. I'll tell him of this miracle. Well, he came back very quickly. And I thought, well, you're back quick. What happened? And he said, well, I went to the gas station, and the gas pumps were not working because they did not reset them. Because during the night, there was a blackout. So, in the town, there was not a glint of light. Thank you.
Some things turn out well, don't they? Bea Cameron was born and raised in Colorado. She started playing guitar in high school. She went on to write songs, record, perform for many years, touring the US, Canada, and Europe. She moved to LA when she was sidetracked for 30 years as an assistant director in the movie and television industry. She's also a lifelong horse enthusiast. Fascinating, life-changing interventions of destiny are sprinkled throughout her experiences, often leading her in unplanned, unalterable directions, not to mention a plethora of stories. Her story today is about one of those serendipitous adventures. BC.
Hi there. Nice crowd. I'm going to tell you a story about things that sometimes happenings that lead you places that you never thought of going, but you know you're supposed to go there. In 1996, I bought the house of my dreams. It was a little house built in 1939 on a little tree-lined street in a tiny enclave of Burbank, unique in the world. A tiny little area where you could still have horses. Little barn in the back, and it was what I'd always dreamed of having. And the nice thing about it was it had a wood-burning fireplace. Always wanted one. So my dream was to have this lovely fireplace with an English hunt print over it, with the little guys with their horses getting ready to go on the hunt, you know? That's what I wanted. Well, the house was old and it needed a lot of work. So I was putting the work into the house, and the fireplace was no exception. I don't know if you're familiar with Z-brick. Z-brick is kind of a pressed masonite or cardboard or something, and it's pressed to look like brick. And that was what was on the front of my fireplace. And it was all cracked and broken, and pieces were falling off. But the rest of the house needed better work, more work done, so I didn't get the fireplace fixed. But in the meantime, for the next year, I looked for my hunt print, the perfect one. Couldn't find it. So one day, I was down at a really fancy-dancy Grand Prix horse jumping competition in San Juan Capistrano. And they had these, on the grass berm, there were these little white tents set up that had little boutiques and little shops and things. And one of them was an art gallery. And I'm walking along, and maybe 30 feet away, I look over, and there's my hunt print. That's the one I wanted. So I walk over, and I'm thinking, I'm way out of my league here. These are little white tents at a fancy horse show. So I walk up, and I'm looking at it, and it's just lovely. And across the bottom, it's a print, it's not a painting, it's a print. And across the bottom it said, "The meet at Blagden." And there were about 8 guys, either on their horses or holding their horses, and there was 30 dogs milling around in the foreground, and this beautiful landscape behind. And way in the far distance, there's a little house. Well, you could tell it wasn't a little house. This was a manor house. But it was so tiny in the back, but you could tell it was a big place. And so I'm looking at this, and the lady walks over, and she says, "May I help you?" And I said, "Well, could you tell me about this print?" "Yes," she said. It's an 1865 hand-painted aquatint of a painting done in 1845 by John Ray Snow. And I said, "How much are you asking for it?" $2,600. I said, "Well, I really love it, but I can't afford that. Not to mention, I can't put a $2,600 print over my Z-brick fireplace." So for a year, I keep looking for a hunt print, and now that I've seen the one I want, you know I'm never going to find another one. So I keep looking and looking. Finally, one night, about a year later, I went out to dinner with some friends, and we were talking about things you should have bought when you had the chance. I said, "Well, I should have bought that hunt print." And my friend said, "Well, why don't you call the gallery? See if she might still have it." I said, "It's been more than a year." She said, "Well, you never know. Can't hurt to ask." So I go home and I dig out her card and I call her and I said, "I don't know if you'll remember me, but at the horse show, there was a print called The Meet at Blagden, and I really liked it, and I was wondering if you might still have it, or do you remember me?" And she said, "Oh, I do remember you. I do." She said, "I almost called you about a month ago because I still had that print, and I was thinking maybe you might want it." And I said, "Well, I do. I want it. I'm going to buy it." She said, "I sold it 3 weeks ago." Okay, not supposed to be. All right, I got it. So I go home and I'm thinking, you know what? I didn't spend the money on the print. I'll spend the money on fixing my fireplace. So I did. I fixed it up. It had antique brick and old wrought iron things in it. It was gorgeous, completely beautiful. So about a week later, after I get the fireplace fixed, my friend calls me, and she has a little antique thrift store kind of thing up on Magnolia Boulevard in Burbank. She called and said, "You know what? We have to stay open on Friday night till 9 o'clock because they're doing a Christmas thing on the street. Could you come help me with my shop?" And I said, "Sure." So my friend and I went that night to help her out, and during the evening, we would go out and go into other little stores and look around, and I made some comment about, "Isn't it odd in this horse community that I can't find a hunt print that I like?" So later in the evening, we went out. We're going up the street to go to this other shop, and we passed this little hole in the wall, little narrow storefront, and the place was packed with junk. And my friend said, "Oh, let's go in here and look." And I said, "Hey, it's kind of creepy in there. It's kind of claustrophobic, you know." "Oh, it'll just take a minute. Let's go in there and look." And I said, "Okay." So I go in, and I'm kind of standing in this little narrow walkway, kind of tapping my foot, waiting for my friends to finish. And I look down, and right next to my foot, there's like a stack of pictures standing one in front of the other, probably 50 of them, all framed and kind of old. And I thought, well, while I'm here, I might as well look through these pictures. Maybe I'll find something. So I step back and I look down, and the front picture of that stack was the meet at Blagden. all beautifully framed, gorgeous. Well, I must have made a noise because my friends came over and said, "What? What's going on?" I said, "That's my print. That's the one I've been looking for." And the lady comes over and says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "How much do you want for that print?" Well, now this is not an old print. This is like from the 1960s, but it's nicely framed, it's very well done, and I want $425. And my friend Virginia, who's the dealer, says, "Oh, too much. She can't pay that. She can't pay that. Mm-mm." I said, "Virginia, shut your pie hole." So the lady says, "All right, I'll take $350. That's the best I can do." Well, I whip out my checkbook and I buy this print and I take it home, put it over my fireplace, and now that I have it home, I actually have time to study it. And I look at the printing, and then underneath, each of the people that were sitting on their horses or holding their horses is their name. And the one over here was the late M.W. Ridley Bart. And over here is Sir M.W. Ridley Bart and Jack Ridley. And I thought, this is like a real family. These people like maybe really existed, you know? And maybe that house is still there. Maybe it's still in existence. So the next spring, I was taking a vacation to England, and I found a little village called Blagden. I thought, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to see if I can find this family or this house. So I go to Blagden. I have a little photograph of the painting, and I take it to the little, they all have a little grocery store post office there. So I take it in, and I'm showing it to the people, everybody that comes in. "Nah, I don't know, but you know who'd know? So-and-so would know." And they'd call so-and-so, and they'd come over. "Nah, you know who'd know? So-and-so would know." And they'd call so-and-so, and they'd come over. Finally, somebody said, "You know who'd know? Olga would know. Olga's our historian. She'd know." So they call Olga. She comes over, and she said, "You know, this doesn't look like Southern England. This looks like Northern England, and the word Blagden means Black Hill, and it's very common." But she said, "The fact that they have Bart written after their name means that they're a baronet, and they should be listed in Burke's Peerage, which is a book that traces English nobility back to dirt," right? So she says, "Let me do some research and I'll check it out." So I get home from my trip, and sure enough, letter from Olga with copies of the pages out of Burke's Peerage with the Matthew White Ridley family in Northern England. And they're outside of a little village called Blythe, near Newcastle upon Tyne, if you're familiar. And it's called the Blagden Estate. And she said, if you contact somebody in Blythe, they can tell you about the family. So I did, contacted a guy there. He wrote me back and said, yes, the family very prominent here. The house still is there, and the Matthew White Ridley family still lives there. House was built in 1722. So he gave me an address. I wrote a letter to the Ridley family, told them how I found the painting, and I asked, did they know where the original painting was? And Lord Ridley, he's now a lord in the House of Lords, Lord and Lady Ridley, Lord Ridley wrote me back, sent me information about the estate, told me that they were very thrilled to hear from me. They did have the original painting hanging in the foyer of the house. And he said, my wife and I now live in a smaller house on the estate, Boston House, and my son, Matthew White Ridley, lives in the big house with his 4-year-old son, Matthew White Ridley, and told me all about it and said, if you're ever in England and you want to come and visit, let us know. Well, the next spring, I was on my way to Ireland. I was producing and directing a documentary in Ireland, and I thought, I'm taking a week ahead, and I'm going to go to the Blagden estate. So we went. They got us from the train, picked us up. Their farm manager took us out, and I went and had lunch with Lord and Lady Ridley at the Boston House. And then we went up to the house, to the main house, and I met his son, Matt Ridley, who is a world-renowned geneticist, wrote a book called Genome, has written many other books. And they showed me the painting, the original painting, and showed me the house, told me stories about the family, showed me their gardens and the fountains, and it was spectacular. And I left there with an understanding that sometimes we don't know where we're headed, and we don't have control of our lives. And the best thing to do, persevere and go with the flow. And then you find out where you're supposed to be. As a matter of fact, I live in Chino Valley now, and it was one of those Kismet adventures that brought me here. When I lived in Burbank with no intention of moving anywhere, and I lived in Chino Valley 2 months later. A day for another story. Thank you.
Thank you, BC. And BC's come full circle in her career. She's back to doing music, writing music, singing, and she has a show coming up here at the Elks on April 28th. So keep your eye open for it. I was at her last show, and it's wonderful. Now for our last storyteller, Matt Santos has taken his experience as a journalist, broadcaster, and self-proclaimed worst father in Prescott to the stand-up stage. He's appeared on comedy showcases and storyteller shows throughout Arizona, and his podcast, The Mile High Show, has been featured at various comedy festivals throughout the Southwest. And I was really happy when I found out Matt had been thinking about having an event like this for as long as I have. So let's give Matt a warm welcome.
Life-changing events affect everybody a little different. As we've heard tonight, it could be a first job, first love, new house, maybe a tragic loss. For me, nothing changed my life more than the process of bringing a new life into the old one. A little background on me, I'm the youngest of 6 children. We grew up in a very noisy and cramped house in the suburbs of Oakland, California. I'm the youngest of 6. My oldest sister is 7 years older than me. 6 kids in 7 years. I like to tell people that's because we were born at a time when my parents didn't have cable or hobbies, but it turns out they actually did have one hobby. Being the youngest in such a crazy household, it was easy to kind of get lost, to get forgotten, to fall back. And I really liked that because it was a little break from the chaos that happened every day in our house. Unfortunately, for me anyway, being out of the eyes and ears of my parents, that meant I was able to find trouble, and I found it quite often, daily if I could. And that resulted in me becoming not just the black sheep of my family, but the black sheep of the town and much of of Alameda County, where I grew up. I was not a good kid. And that followed me into my teens and into my 20s, finding a lot of trouble, sometimes being featured on the evening news. And I tried to clean that up. I tried to straighten out, and throughout my mid and late 20s, I sort of did. And when I was 29, I met a beautiful woman. I thought I had my act together. We got married, and I tried to be a good husband. I did not succeed at that for several years. Before we were married and then into our marriage, we had thought and talked about having children, and we said, give it a few years. We'll really get to know each other, and those few years became 5, and 5 became 10, and 10 became a dozen, and we just kind of figured maybe parenthood isn't for us. And in the course of that time, we moved from Northern California to Arizona, and as I said, I wasn't what you would call the best husband. I worked a lot. I worked a lot of late nights, and it got to the point where I would come home from work on a regular basis about 2, 3 in the morning, and many years before, my wife had kind of stopped waiting up for me, so I would come home and she would be asleep. Until one night, 15 years into our marriage, I came home about 3 o'clock in the morning, tiptoeing as much as I can tiptoe into a house. And I walked into our bedroom, and she was wide awake, sitting at the foot of the bed, and she was crying. My first thought was, oh no, who died? Or worse yet, looking around for her suitcases. Maybe she finally wised up and she was on her way out the door. I didn't know. But she looked at me, and she was quiet for a few minutes. And I said, what's wrong? And she had her head down, and she says, I'm pregnant. And my first thought, the thought that I probably should have kept to myself, but I didn't, I said it out loud, was, how did that happen? In hindsight, that's probably a conversation I should have had with my dad 35 years before. But she explained it to me. She was very clear, and she didn't use pictures or videos or anything. She just kind of explained the process. And I was shocked, of course. I didn't know how I would. I mean, how could I, with very little training, become a good father? There was no doubt she was going to be a great mother. I knew her personality, but I came from a household that was not very affectionate. We knew we were loved, but we were loved in a very silent and aggressive kind of way. We weren't an I love you, son, I love you, dad kind of household. My dad would actively make fun and humiliate us, and that's how we knew he loved us, when he teased us to tears. But I knew he loved me. I knew my mom loved me growing up, and I had lost my dad many years before, but there was no doubt he loved me. But I didn't really want that for my soon-to-be child. I wanted to be caring and nurturing and emotional. I didn't know if I was going to be able to do that. So I dove right in. Prenatal books, YouTube dives. I did my research. I was determined I was going to be a good father. I was very into fiction at the time, so I wasn't sure how that was going to develop itself. But I tried, and because my wife, a couple years younger than me, I was 44, she was 42, we were what's known as an at-risk or a high-risk pregnancy. And the Mayo Clinic describes that as at a certain age, specifically for the mother and the baby, that a soon-to-be child is very susceptible to issues, health problems, possible deformities, child development issues, and certain forms of cancer. Now, cancer runs pretty deep in both my family and my wife's family. And then I had spent well over a dozen years abusing my body in every form possible, ingesting every illegal substance I can think of. So I could only think, this poor child doesn't have a chance. But we're going to follow all the guidelines. We're going to follow all the advice. We're going to watch as many videos as we can. We're going to listen to our doctor. So we did. We dove right into it. But because we were a high-risk pregnancy, I say we like I had something to do with it, but we would go in for ultrasounds way more than the usual amount. We were going in pretty regular. And we got to the point where we had very good conversations with the nurse that was administering these tests. It was the same one all the time. A lot of communication with our doctor. And we would joke with the nurse administering the ultrasound test, and we would have a lot of small talk and banter. It was pretty lighthearted. And then about the 10th week in, this normally jovial nurse is doing the test, and she's studying the screen very intently. And she just said, What's mean? She responded with another She goes, I'll be back in a minute. She went outside, brought in a doctor, a strange doctor, not our doctor. And he proceeded to look at the screen and did the little wandy thing and said, I was getting to really hate the word And he left, printed out some pictures and left. About 10 minutes later, a very long 10 minutes, the nurse came in and she said, well, the doctor forwarded over these test results to your doctor, and your doctor would like you to meet in her office when you can. When can you meet with her? I said, well, it's Tuesday. How about Thursday afternoon? She says, how about tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? So 8 a.m. it was. We showed up the next morning. That whole visit is kind of a blur. The doctor told us, she said, well, we saw this growth earlier. We just assumed it was a cyst. That's pretty common. But it's not. It is a tumor. And prepare yourself, it's 90% chance this is a cancerous tumor. We need to take a look at this right away. Here's some pamphlets on prenatal cancer treatment. Here's some pamphlets on chemotherapy and how it'll affect the mother, how it'll affect the baby. And you have to make some decisions, but we need to take a look at this as soon as possible, but we can't do so until you're well established in your second trimester, so about 4 weeks from now. So for 4 weeks, we tried to sleep and we couldn't. We tried to be normal and we couldn't. We continued to just try to continue, and that was difficult. So we went in for this we, again, inserting myself really hard into this story that I really have nothing to do with. But my wife goes in for this surgery. And they wanted to take a look, and that whole day is kind of a blur. The doctor comes out after the surgery and says, both mommy and baby are doing fine. It was a tumor. It was growing faster than the baby. It's doubled in size since the last time we did an ultrasound. So I just decided to take it out. And I don't think it was cancerous, but we don't know what it was. It was growing and it was big, but they're doing fine. That's really what I remember from that morning. And then she said, in all honesty, it's been there longer than the baby. Had you not gotten pregnant, we wouldn't have known this, and it really could have been fatal for your wife. So getting pregnant really saved your wife's life. And of course, I was ecstatic. So over the next few weeks, few months, we really dove into this pregnancy more with a vigor. One of the most challenging things of this was attending those childbirth classes at YRMC, because at 44 years old, I was the oldest person in there, including the teacher, including the 39-year-old soon-to-be grandma who was there because her daughter was giving birth and her son-in-law was overseas, stationed over in Iraq. I look into the class the first night and I see 4 people I know. 2 recent graduates of Chino Valley High School, where I worked, and 2 students, one was a junior and one was a senior, currently going to Chino Valley High School, where I worked. I felt old. And that senior walks up to me, goes, Mr. Santos, what are you doing here? Is this your daughter? My wife at 42 really loved that. I did not. So in the course of this class, they explained to all those new fathers, because we were so excited to be there, said, now remember, dads, if this turns into a cesarean section, you will not be allowed in the delivery room. Won't be allowed in there. One dad stood up and says, just try and keep me out of there. I'm going to be there. And I was secretly praying for a C-section because the windsock's right down the street. I'll be by the pool table. I'll be fine. You can update me later. So, several weeks later, her water breaks. We rush to the emergency room. We're there 14 hours in labor. And then against her wishes, but in an answer to my prayers, the doctor says, all right, it's C-section time. I said, all right, hon, I'll see you on the other side. As the nurse is handing me scrubs, I says, no, I don't need these. I'm not allowed in there. I'm fine. She goes, who told you that? I said, everybody, the teacher, the class, they lied. Get suited up, you're going in. So I put the scrubs on, the little booties on my feet. I'm walking down what had to be a 4-mile hallway of polished glass floors, trying not to fall and need a doctor of my own. And we get to the delivery room, and thankfully, my wife's laying down with a little divider, and I'm on this side of the divider with the anesthesiologist. The whole construction zone's going on that side. And after a while, I hear the cry of an infant, and I look over, and they're doing the little APGAR test. On the other side of the room, they've got him. He's a perfect little boy. And then the nurse says, Dad, come on over. I want you to cut the umbilical cord. I says, you are obviously already cut it because you're on the other side of the room. She goes, we saved you a piece. I says, what is that, a piece of cake? What? It's my son, not pie. So I go over anyway, and sure enough, they had me cut a little thing, and he's beautiful. He's a great little boy. They says, okay, now carry him over to the nursery. So you crazy? I can't walk down the hallway carrying a baby, got a camera around my shoulder. I can't do this. You guys went to college. You do it. My health plan evidently doesn't cover that. So I had to carry him down. I get to the nursery, way down the hallway, shuffling my feet, trying not to fall. I hand him to the nurse in the nursery. She's going to go clean him up. I go check on my wife. I come back to the nursery, and there's a bunch of empty cribs, and then 3 cribs there, 2 on each side wrapped in pink, and a beautiful little boy wrapped in blue in the middle. My son, the beloved, right in front of me. So I pull up a chair, and I go into the most heartfelt conversation I've ever had in my life. Talking to this beautiful little boy, explaining his family history. You are the latest in a long line of firstborn. Anthony Santos is your Uncle Tony, who you're going to meet soon. My Uncle Tony, your great Uncle Tony, who was the most weird, strange person you've ever met. He's passed away now. Your great-grandfather and your great-great-grandfather, all Tony Santoses. And I tell him about his grandfather, my father, who was a great storyteller, a hilarious human being, but he struggled with so many things. And I'm telling him all this, and I'm telling him stories about me growing up, all the mistakes I've done and made, stories that to this day he's probably too young to hear. And after about a half hour, I'm drained physically, emotionally, mentally. And I sit back, and I'm wiping tears from my eyes. And I glance up, and I see a nurse walking in with a 4th little baby in her arms, in blue. And she says, are you ready to meet your son? Who's this imposter I just spent 30 minutes pouring my heart and soul to? And more importantly, am I going to be responsible for this stranger's therapy when he's 20? Flash forward 14 years. That 4th baby is now 14 years old. And for the very first time, because he's standing right here in the back of the room, he's heard how not only did he save his mom's life, but he pretty much saved mine as well.
Wow, Matt. Oh, phew. What a great, let's have it for all the storytellers today.